Hey, Sam, you come up with that intro line?
You didn't tell me that was today.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Writers' Room with Sam and Jim. On this show, we invite aspiring writers into our little podcast, Writers' Room of the Air here, to help them work on and develop their stories. And you can help us out by going to Apple Podcasts and hitting that subscribe button, or better yet, rate and review us. You can also join the conversation we're having at Facebook at the Writers' Room with Sam and Jim, or you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the Sam and Jim. We're going to break some story with Claire Jennings in just a few minutes. But first, Sam, what's going on?
What's going on is that I feel like we are doomed.
Is that news?
I feel like there's two phases to our life, our writing life. There is the phase where we are on a show and the phase when we're not on a show. And this isn't really a grass is greener thing, although it might be a little bit. But when we're on a show, we are all consumed.
Yeah.
Right? The shows always start out, oh, we got time, everything's going to be great, this is going to be wonderful. And
Inevitably,
it meets notes, and the show meets the realities of production. It meets a million meetings and busy showrunners and busy this and all of a sudden you're out of time and you're working like crazy and you have to be creative on demand, and it's a ton of fun but also incredibly draining. And by the time you get to the end of production where you've been on set and you're rewriting in your hotel room and you're doing all these things and politics and all of that, and by the end you're a husk.
Yep.
And then we end up the first few weeks, we're like, okay, don't call me. And we just want to rest. But then at some point that itch happens. And, we've been writing pretty much nonstop since our last gig, but that's our own stuff, and it's been great. And we're having a lot of fun, and it's very creatively satisfying. But we got to make rent, and at some point we need to get a gig. But what I really miss is being crushed. I miss the all-consuming thing where you wake up at 6 a.m. and you just start thinking about it, and you want to walk into the room with some ideas, and there's problems, and you want to have answers, and you just are just working all the time. And
it's
you're
like
consumed.
being in a good script. You have drive all the time.
All the time.
I don't have enough time to do this. I don't have time to do that. I have to do this.
Yeah, it makes every other part of life more fun. Like I go out for drinks with friends. Oh, thank God, I need a break. But I miss it, and I miss the all-consuming insanity of it until I'm in it. And then I miss hey, isn't it great when we're sitting by your pool and we're breaking a new story and we got the whiteboard out and our schedule and I get to see my kids and I'm not grumpy all the time. And it goes back between those two things. And I'm like, where is that spot? What's the happy place? And I don't think it is. I think it's ecstatic a chunk of the time, and it's just wasted a chunk of the time, and we just got to find our moments. Unless you have some magic, very thoughtful, penetrating answer that I'm...
No, I think we should change the title of the show to The Bipolar Writers' Room with Sam and Jim.
That might be redundant, actually.
It's kind of true.
All right, so here's looking forward to the next gig where we get crushed.
Okay, let's get into this week's show.
Hello, Claire. Thanks for coming to the Writers' Room with Sam and Jim. This is Sam.
This is Jim.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here, Claire.
This is my favorite part of the show when she has no regrets yet.
Yes. She still thinks this is a good idea.
So, Claire, I want to ask you some questions. I know JR sent these ahead of you, so you have a moment to think about it because we don't want to sandbag anybody. But we sat around and we talked about what are the most interesting things that we want to ask people. We all have our answers to this. I'm dying to hear yours, which is tell us about a time where you actually felt like a writer.
Ooh, okay. One of the earlier times that I felt like a writer was in college. I worked on we had a student TV network, and I was a film major, and so that was kind of an extracurricular that I joined because that was what all the other film majors were doing, and it was very, very positive peer pressure. But so I started working on this show, Bay State. That's the longest running college soap opera. I think it might be the only college soap opera. So that's what I have the title.
College is a soap opera, isn't it? Really?
Exactly. All right. And I applied to everyone starts as a PA, and then I applied for the writing staff. And when I And I got the call from like the head writer who was like 2 years older than me, but seemed like so much more mature and sophisticated. That was like my first real unpaid writing gig. And so that was something I did through the rest of college. And my senior year, I was the head writer for the show. And that was like my first time kind of working in a writer's room in our like approximation of it. Yeah, and I got a lot of notes from like our faculty advisor to tone it down, which
let me back you up because I honestly don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Okay.
There is a fictional soap opera done on some college network somewhere with actors and production, and you do an episode. How often?
We would put out, I think, like 3 or 4 episodes a semester, but the show's been on since like 1991.
Wow.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And then people watch this, and does it reflect what's going on in the campus, or is this just, you're just having doctors, perform bad surgeries and then killing their evil twin, or I don't know what?
I think there was an evil twin on an earlier season, but it's set like at a fictional college. So I went to Boston University, and it's set at like Beacon Hill University, so like a college in Boston. That's like we had like one of the deans of the school actually was a recurring character.
Wow.
So it was like, it's kind of like college Degrassi is how we pitched it.
So do you have the same characters, or when the actors like grow older and graduate, do you then create new characters to take their place?
We do, yeah. And we had a rule on the show that like you never actually see any of the characters graduate. They either like
die,
get killed off, die, leave in disgrace, get arrested. Like it's always anything but graduate, basically.
That's fantastic. I love that.
Unbelievable. Talk about training, man. I mean, that's
like real training.
That is. And you're not getting paid, so it really is real training.
Right.
It's real life training.
You have to really love it. Exactly.
And you have to produce. And how long are these episodes?
They're like 20 to 30 minutes.
Forget about film school. Just go to Boston University. I mean, that's the bang for the buck right there. Holy mackerel. Wow, that's amazing. And then becoming the head writer. And it is kind of funny how people 2 years ahead of you are so old.
Yeah, no, it seemed, I was very nervous about applying. And but that was, kind of as I was deciding that I wanted to pursue screenwriting, like as I was already a film major, but I was like kind of narrowing down like what I wanted to focus on. And that was a good boost of confidence that like, okay, this is, something I really enjoy doing and might be something I want to pursue.
Seems to me you should go apply at General Hospital or one of those places. And what an incredible resume thing right there. Although maybe you don't want to be in that world, but God, it's talk about producing a lot of stuff.
I definitely, when I was working on the show, the other writers and I I think leaned more into like the dark comedy of it, which is sort of the kind of thing I like to write now. I don't know. And I like the idea of playing with like those familiar formats like the soap opera or the cop procedural or whatever and making it into something that kind of pokes fun at it and taking like a comedic angle on like a dramatic format.
All right, so that was the high point. So the high point is you're in college, you're all of a sudden in a writer's room, and now, so what's the low point? What was something that just set you back? Besides, I assume it was moving to Los Angeles or something associated with that.
I think after I graduated, I moved to LA and I started working as an assistant for a talent manager. And part of what drew me to that job was I was really a big fan of a lot of his clients who are, writers and comedians. And there were like a couple really close calls where like I was, there were clients that I had like developed a relationship with. And we were talking about, once we sell their show, like maybe I could go be a writer's assistant for them and things like that. And I mean, the pandemic, like, kind of ruined a lot of those opportunities. One that was like particularly tough is like we actually started doing a writer's room for this sketch show that I was really excited to be working on. And then the sketch show unfortunately was on Quibi. So
you mean on the Titanic? Is that what happened?
Yeah,
You're like, we'll be doing a lot of voyages. It'll be back and forth every season. Yeah, I know. Who could have predicted it wouldn't have that network would have lasted? But I think everybody actually. I think there were a lot of predictions that way. But that's too bad. That's terrible. And I know that there's so many ways that things die that have nothing to do with the writers or the show, or it's just the network changed their direction, the executive left, et cetera, et cetera.
New regime.
Mm-hmm. The
all
network
the time.
they got out of original content, which happened to us once. I mean, stuff like that. It's nonstop. Well, that is real though. I will tell you that I was once talking to one of my agent's many assistants at various times, because we've been with the agent for a long time. And I called her because she was such a great assistant. And I said, hey, she was done being an assistant at this point, but she'd reached out if anything comes up. And I said, the showrunner's looking for an assistant. I'm sorry, no, we need a writer's PA. Mm-hmm. And would you want to apply for it? She called me back and said, I don't think I do, because I want to start at a higher level, like a showrunner's assistant or a writer's assistant. Mm. And I was so struck by the fact that there was this opportunity to get into a group, but I was so cranky about the fact that I would have to explain that to her that that I was like,
You're
okay,
missing an opportunity.
Yeah, I didn't want to recommend her now because I wasn't sure that she would be, at least pretend that running around and getting lunch and getting the drinks is the pinnacle of her professional life, right. Which we all have to pretend that about jobs, regardless of how we feel about it. I mean, JR laughs at our jokes a little too loud, that kind of stuff.
A little too often. Sometimes they're not even jokes.
Yeah,
He's
like,
just over there
wow, I'm once again surprised at how amazing you guys are. But
keep signing the checks and I'll keep laughing.
Right, and so you're like, okay. But that I didn't recommend her. And then the woman who did get hired for that gig was the showrunner's assistant in a few months because she was good. Yeah. And then she became she's a working writer now. So because of those relationships and all of that. So it is hard when you're in that assistant job and you're starting to do your calculus and your geometry. Here? How do I, and then it all gets taken away. That must have been really hard.
Yeah.
All right. So let's jump into what you're writing about. So tell us about your story. What's the title? What's the log line or a few sentences about it? What are you working on?
Sure. So I'm working on a half-hour pilot. Working title is Forever 21 Forever. And it's about a woman who is working at a journalism startup in New York that kind of goes under after they get involved in like a lawsuit. It's loosely inspired by the whole thing with Gawker Media from a couple years ago. And she moves back home to her suburban hometown and gets a part-time job at Forever 21 in the mall and decides that she wants to write this first-person account of the decline of American mall culture. And so it's her kind of trying to reestablish herself as a journalist with this what she thinks is this big story that she's putting together while surviving as a retail employee, which is something she's never done before.
All right. So we all know about malls, even though they're fading. They're subcultures in and of, they're small cities, subcultures in and of themselves. So let me just ask you, what's the tone of this? What kind of story is it?
I'd say it's pretty much a straight comedy. The protagonist is kind of, at least as I see her, she's kind of a love to hate her character. She's a little too, this is Paige, by the way. She's a little too, she takes her work and her identity as a journalist very seriously. And even though she grew up in the suburbs, she considers like her time in New York working at this journalism startup, like those were her formative years where she really came into her own. And now she kind of approaches her hometown like it's like a foreign country and she's kind of this outside observer. And she like really strives to bring like her journalistic eye to everything she experiences. And I have her constantly like jotting down notes or like making little voice memos of just kind of these inane observations.
What does she feel like though? Sorry to interrupt, but what does she feel like? That's all good structure. She's a journalist. I get it. But what does she feel like? What does she feel like?
What does she feel like? What is the character
feeling?
I mean,
it's not just about the fact that she's a journalist. Why is she doing this about the mall, for example? Why her?
Yeah. So I think she, having kind of had this early success blow up in her face, that's kind of how she, I guess, forms a connection with like the people that she meets in her new job. Is she kind of realizes that they've all had things in their life that they were striving towards that didn't pan out. And so I think she sees herself as kind of shedding light on this subculture that people don't know the full story about, like the person who's packing up their order at the cash register. And, So I think she, in a way, she's like kind of trying to tell her own story through like telling, writing about these people. So she, I guess, like connects to them on a certain level, but is also still kind of trying to set herself apart and think, she wants to be like the I guess like the bridge between these, what she sees as these two worlds of like the suburban mall and like the media elite.
So, all right. So here's the question. That took you a really long time to answer that question. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think, Jim, you tell me if you think I'm full of it right now. I think there's
You're always full of it.
Yeah, but there's an inverse proportion. The longer it takes you to answer the question, the less you actually know.
That's right.
So I'm going to just say all of that made sense, but it's 90% of stuff that is not it's deep. What's the word I'm looking for? Because it's not bullshit, is it?
No, it's not bullshit. It's almost kind of surface. Right?
We're in the bullshit business, Claire. It's not a bust. Go ahead.
The thing that I was thinking about listening to you answer that, Claire, was but what makes her funny, right? Like there's got to be there's some contrast between who she is and this world she's in, right? What is smacking her in the face, or what are we finding funny about watching her get smacked in the face as she's doing this stuff?
Right.
Yeah. That's a good question. I guess like the comedy I've been drawing from it is like her inflated sense of self-importance contrasted with the pretty average life she's in now.
Great. Stop there. Great. Stop there. Say nothing else.
How does that feel, right? Like, so is she being like over serious? Is she like interviewing her coworkers?
Yes.
What's it feel like?
Yes.
Yeah. So she's like...
Short answers, Claire. Short answers. We're going to force you.
She's interviewing her coworkers. She's telling anyone who will listen about the groundbreaking work she's doing.
Okay. Stop.
That's good?
That's good. Okay, I'm writing that down. So she is parading her earlier success. She's using as much. She's a name dropper. She's the name.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? She does not belong here? Is that the...
She believes she's better than these people. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 2.
All right.
I'm writing them down. You see the problem, Claire, is you're trying to write with depth and nuance. And then we're trying. And we're like, there's time for that. There'll be time for that, I swear.
It is so shocking how often the obvious answer is actually the answer.
Yeah. And by the way, you can get all that. And I want to quote a show that I recently discovered called Mythic Quest. I don't know if anybody's watching the show.
I watched the pilot of it a while ago.
I did too, and I didn't stick with it. And then I got back into it over the last week or two, and it's really good. It's really good.
This is counter-programming Squid Game?
No, yeah. It's a comedy, but the world is, it's a video game world. It's a company. And the lead, played by Rob, I can never remember his last name, McElhenney or whatever, but he from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. But
McElhenney?
He's arrogant, but also... and delusional, also very smart, but also a poser. And all of this is just comedy gold.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there are emotional moments, but I'm watching the way, he's obviously a very good writer, and Megan Gantz is another writer, and there's a creator, and they're all so talented. And it's just conflict after conflict after conflict. And what you were talking about when I was listening to that answer, which was somewhere between 45 and 90 minutes, it was a lot about, it wasn't about the conflict, and it wasn't about this, and it's this, and it's this. And then you can get into flesh out the, but I am trying to help you, Claire, which is, because I've sat in the chair. Now, we don't write comedy anymore, but I know when we don't have it broken down that simply, and then I go to actually sit down and write the damn scene.
Right.
I can't write it because there's too much in my head as opposed to this is the conflict, this is what's going on with this character, this is what they want, and then I write the terrible version, and then I try to get the nuance and all that, but it all comes out of character, of course. All right, so I'm sorry, Claire, we have 2 things. Do you agree with those things? Drop names, and she's better than everybody else? That's what I've written down?
Yeah.
Okay.
Got anything else up your sleeve for her?
Yeah, I mean, I think I also see her as someone who's like a people pleaser. Like she wants to be
she's a pleaser. Pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and a sort of arrogant pleaser.
Liked.
That's sort of an interesting, or I don't know if arrogance is the right word.
Well, then they're delusional. Because then they're like, it's actually like some Hollywood people who are someone that Jim and I know who shall not be named, but she was always dogging Hollywood people, for the fakeness and the this and the that. And I said to Jim one day, I think she's the most Hollywood person I've ever met. and she was. It's still to this day. And we met her early on. So it's because there's this sort of pretension of authenticity, and what's important is love and family and all this stuff. But what's really coming out is striving and back-talking and just bullshit. And you're like, wow, they are just not in sync with who they are. Because if I actually could have been honest with this person, I would have said,
You know, it's funny, Sam, that you bring that up, because I was watching a comedy the other night, and I was thinking that in really good comedy, you're watching somebody be blind in a way that you're worried you might be blind too. You know what I mean? Like, it's people who are just sailing along being who they are, and you're like, oh, they don't realize how stupid they are. Like, that's always our own concerns, isn't it?
Like
what am I blind about?
Like Michael from The Office.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he was the most deluded person and the funniest, and Steve Carell, he sailed
Genius.
Genius. So we're trying to make your script a little dumber is what we're doing.
That's our great skill. We can take anything and make it dumber.
But I think, honestly, Claire, she drops names. She thinks she's better than everybody else. But the bottom line is she's a pleaser who wants to be liked. But the fact that she thinks she's better, and that's in conflict with that.
Yeah.
That's pretty... What do you think? I think that's a character.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that hits the note I was going for more than the first answer.
Well, I'm guessing you have all this written down in a big document that's 4 to 7 pages long.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and what we're saying is...
Or was that 47?
Right, 47 pages long. And what I'm advocating, and I think Jim too, is saying, okay, good to have that doc, if that's your process, but then break it down.
4 to 7 syllables.
Yeah,
right.
There we go.
All right. Tell us, why do you want to write this story? Why are you drawn to this?
Yeah, so I am interested in both the journalism side of it. That was something that I considered when I was, I've always known I wanted to be a writer. But when I was younger, I actually, around middle school, I really thought I wanted to be a fashion journalist and write for Vogue. And then I realized I wasn't pretty or mean enough. But I still am interested, especially in kind of the freelance journalist lifestyle is interesting to me. I've also been obsessively following, have you guys, this is such a tangent, but were you guys aware of the kidney donation drama in that New York Times? Okay.
Yeah, that was amazing.
So personalities like that fascinate me. And the combination of that with the public service patina of journalism is really interesting. And then also I, from high school on, grew up in a small suburban town and spent a lot of time at the mall. And I never worked at the mall, but I always kind of had this idea that it would be such a fun job. And now obviously I'm working retail, that's no one's passion really. But I think for someone like this character, I think there's something kind of romantic about it to her, and kind of tapping into those nostalgic memories of spending all your time at the mall in high school.
Okay, so Claire, that was a very long answer too.
Yeah, it was.
Right? Now, I am not trying to bust your chops. I'm trying to point out that the hardest thing for you probably, and honestly, it's maybe just the hardest thing in writing, is breaking it down to the thing. So if we could just go back to that answer, and if I said, why do you want to write the script in one line, what could it be? And maybe you can't do it, and we'll just keep hammering until we get it into a line or two, right? What would it be? Because it's too hard to service all of that, right?
Yeah.
For you, and I want you to be able to service one thing, right? And I have my pitch to you, but I want to hear if maybe you can do it.
Okay. Yes, I guess it's a character from a world I find interesting, and a setting that I think would make for a fun workplace comedy.
And what do you want to say about that world? I mean, the reason you write a script, right, is because you have something you want to say about where you're setting it or who that character is.
Yeah, I guess I want to... now I'm overthinking it.
It's hard. And by the way, we're totally setting you up, because here you are, you've got to come up with it. You're not used to thinking about this way. And we are, and we push each other, and we get pushed around by our agents, producers, executives to really break down, right, to what it is. So I'm going to pitch you an example. This could be totally wrong, but this is the kind of thing. I was really struck when you said, I'm not pretty or mean enough, right, to be a journalist. Okay, that's a beautiful statement.
I went straight to there's a show called Pretty Mean, and it's all about working for Vogue.
I think my daughter watches all of those shows. Yeah. But about pretty mean people.
Yeah, it's on the CW, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
There's a whole network.
Otherwise known as the CW.
That's right. That idea right there is, it sounds to me, listening to you, that's where this is coming from, which is you have a woman that is formally mean, still delusional.
She's gotten her comeuppance, but she's still delusional.
Right, and she comes back to do this thing about the little people, and I think she's going to learn that she is the little people, that we're all the little people, right? So that's the kind of the arc. But in the meantime, the comedy is her thinking that she's prettier and smarter, which is what mean people tell themselves, right? That they're smart, not mean,
right?
Than all these people. But really, it's Claire raging against the machine about basically pretty and mean to be a journalist. What do you think, Claire?
Yeah, I think that's right on. Yeah, because I really am trying to put this character like in a setting where she has to kind of confront her delusions about herself, and so yeah, I think that's my answer.
Well, let's take what you learned.
So go ahead, Jim. What's the next thing?
Now that you have this handle anyway on your character, what's the story you're trying to tell? What's the structure of your story? What are you looking at for the show?
Yeah, so that's actually kind of where where I've been getting stuck, because I haven't. I'm trying not to make this a super long answer.
Now we've got her scared.
You can hear me gearing up. I'm like, wait a second.
I know. Hold on.
JR can always clip things out. It's okay.
Okay. But so I think it's her, the day-to-day is her kind of adjusting to like the indignities of retail work while trying to balance the career ambitions that she still has with fitting in this new world. But where I've kind of been running into trouble is figuring out like how much I want, like I guess at what point I want her to kind of give up and like really, become kind of, or not even give up, but just like become invested in working at Forever 21 versus kind of keeping herself at a remove and making it more about like this journalism piece that she's working on. So,
all right.
Yeah. So I guess
So, so I hear what you're saying. And what I would propose, what I think is happening is this: she's not going to learn.
You don't want her to learn.
No,
I don't think.
Right.
You're trying to get her so that it's a movie, really, in your head, which is she starts out this way, and then the arc is by the end of an hour to a couple hours, she learns that she actually belongs here in some way, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But Michael Scott never learned that he was the
biggest
nuts,
doofus manager,
racist,
ever.
misogynist. He never learned any of that, and that's what was funny about it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the moment, he might get close to it, but he would always turn left because he just could not help himself. Right?
You might feel bad about like affecting a particular person's feelings in some way, right? And reconcile that somehow. But his central idiocy never budged.
So this idea that you're trying to get of growth and learning, I'm not saying she should have none. Michael Scott was an extreme character, and that didn't work on that show. That show was terrible, The Office, and it got canceled after 9. No one talks about it, but it does it. That's one kind of comedy, and this is your show, and you got to do it your way. And it can be richer. Not richer is the wrong word, but less comedic, more real people in some way than that show chose to go down that road. But the stuff that you're freighting yourself for the pilot of there's going to be growth and there's going to be this and there's going to be that, that's a lot to get into 30 minutes.
Yeah.
You just need a taste. You need the opportunity for her. Maybe she doesn't take it, but maybe she wonders if she should have, just for a second, because you have a whole series to do that. And really, if you're looking, you're just looking at a 10 episode movie if you want that to be followed by another 10 episode. But you never do you ever want her to get comfortable and say, "Oh yeah, I like these people, and I'm going to stay in this mall, and this is my life now." I mean, that would pretty much kill the show, right?
Yeah.
Right. So now we just you have to create problems for this person constantly. And if she does something good, she can't get rewarded for it.
Right.
Right? Because that's the big thing that we do is protect the character.
It's like the tarot card of the fool, right? Like eyes on the stars while stepping off the edge of a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that means either, Claire, so you know.
She wants to be a successful journalist, right? It's like she's got this whole world in her head of where she's going and how it's going to work. Meanwhile, it's Forever 21 forever, Sam.
Oh, Forever 21 forever. Ooh, that's good.
Which could be supernatural, but let's not go there.
So the whole question of her that you talked about, which is this idea of her being a journalist, how do you show that in the show? Is she just writing a blog that'll never get posted? Is she, and how do we hear it? Is there a narration for the show? Her writing? How does it work?
Yeah, I had her kind of doing like, either we hear like a voiceover of like notes she's jotting down, or she does like little voice memos, not so like records things as she's going. Because I want to kind of have it feel like she's like narrating her life and kind of making herself like the main character of the story.
She's reporting on herself.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's funny and
definitely
delusional.
Self-obsessed.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think like in the pilot, I have it like after she's kind of been, her journalism career is fallen apart. She takes this part-time job and like she hasn't been like inspired to write, and then kind of getting introduced to this world and getting a chance to like report on the little people who need, their moment in the sun, is kind of what inspires her to start writing again. But yeah, in terms of, I guess I want her to stay frustrated with where she's at and trying to get this career back. So maybe it is like she starts a blog, or she's constantly working on this epic like feature-length story that no one ever wants to publish. I'm trying to think of the best way to do that so it's something you can sustain over several episodes.
Well, you can sustain all of this, and also it can fade away too. So there's so many ways that you could do that. I think all these are good answers. The question is, what's an episode of this show look like? Because have you written a draft of this yet, or written an act or anything?
Yeah.
And how did it feel? How did it feel when you wrote it?
I mean, I don't love the draft I have right now. It kind of feels like as I was writing it, I was still sort of trying to clarify like the character's motivation, but kind of felt myself going back and forth between like building out this world of the mall and kind of introducing these fun like supporting characters and setting up like future conflicts for the protagonist in terms of like her writing career. And
do you find your scenes are super long?
Yeah. They're pretty long.
Yeah, and it's all comes down, and I can guess that because when you're looking for something, you end up writing a lot of stuff like looking around,
like checking all the drawers and cupboards, trying to find that thing.
Like if I said to you, "What's the story? What's her story in the pilot?" 1 line, 2, or 1 or 2 lines. That's it. No cheating. No cheating, Claire. Only 1 comma.
Oh boy.
Well, you see the problem here, right? Right.
Yeah.
And before I even put your feet, to hold your feet to the fire, the problem is it's really, she comes and she meets a lot of people and it's her first day of work. That's not an episode. Right.
Right.
And there's all these quirky characters. Not an episode. Right. It's not even a show. So I'm feeling for you when you sit down to write, because it must be torturous. Right. Right. And because you're writing and looking and looking and looking while you're drafting, which sounds really hard. And I only know that because I've done it so many times.
So many times.
Not in a long time, to be fair, not in a long time.
Or you think you know what you're looking for, and then you find it and you're like, oh, that ain't it.
That happened yesterday.
Yeah.
that happens all the time. Or the outline makes so much sense, and you're like, "Oh, this scene's about this." Then you write it, and you realize that's not what the scene's about, or that's really boring.
Yeah, it can't be about that.
Or
barely a scene.
or there's no turn in this scene. I thought it was, but it's not a big enough one. Nothing happens. So I think that is. I mean, the way you're pitching is kind of reflecting the way you're writing, right?
Right.
And I don't know, and I don't want to sound, so let me throw in, I think this is what it sounds like to me. Because, well, there's always the fall in love with our babies and all that, but I don't think that's what you're doing. I think what it is you're not committing to that one thing, that small thing, because you want it to be about 6 things.
Yeah.
I mean, you've committed to taking this person who had some success, right? And you've put her in this, suddenly she's in mall retail, which seems a mile away from where she was, right? So in a sense, that's like the worst thing that could happen to her. But on this particular day of your pilot episode, what is happening to her that is so awful or so extreme or so full of conflict that it highlights both what she's lost and what she has and how that's a mess for her?
Right.
Right.
Now, can I pitch an idea?
Please.
All right. So this is my terrible idea. And I'm using this to illustrate how low we can bring this poor page, right? Which is, she gets this job at whatever retail spot you pick, and she's kind of lording it up that what she did, but of course nobody knows what she did. She's not famous. Even if she wrote for Gawker, who cares? Right? In this mall and wherever it is.
She's a legend in her own mind.
Right. And and maybe someone's like, "Oh yeah, I think I heard about Gawker once. That's that porn site or whatever." I mean, really nobody knows. And then The big turn is the guy who owns or manages the mall, who is a character maybe. He's like, oh, you're a writer? And he gives her a job, which she needs, and you have to establish why she needs it in addition to her retail job, for writing the little mall newspaper that they put out, the one sheet that they put out once a week. That thing in the front, in the free thing that nobody ever reads, or the website that never looks at. And now she's trying to do something with it. And he's like, once a week I want you to go interview someone who has a shop in the mall and get to know them and then write a little stupid thing about it. And of course, she can't do it, right? Because she wants to write Gawker. And he's like, no, I just want to know, like, they got their money. They've always dreamt about opening this sweater store. And she's writing something else. But in the process of doing that, she's meeting people. And, her story gets gutted to 2 paragraphs. And it's that kind of thing. That to me is like a structure to get her in. And it's something that she could do week to week. Which, by the way, could fall away. You could lose it. But it's not like this is the show. The reason I bring up that incredibly simple and probably dumb story idea is that it's so simple, and it'll give you, and now you know what to do.
Well,
now,
you're taking her natural skills and what she wants to do, and you're putting her in the basement.
Right. I mean, Michael Scott wants to be. He would like to be. There was an arc where he tried to be like a vice president, but it's the Peter principle. He has hit that level that is above his abilities, just above it, and he's stuck there forever. And maybe she has too. Right. Yeah. So that's what I'm pitching.
Yeah, maybe the site failed because she's actually not very good.
That too, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, I like the mall newsletter idea because I had in the pilot, like, she was like, my second act break or whatever was like she almost gets fired because she goes off during her lunch break and gets distracted, like collecting, background color for her article and like interviewing a bunch of different people and like almost misses her next shift. But like it wasn't really like it was more just like she didn't manage her time well. It wasn't like she had like a competing job or like an actual reason to be out there.
Well, it doesn't go. The question is, does it go to the core of her problem, which I think you were getting close, which is she wants to be a writer.
Right.
But then I need to know her goal, right? And her goal is no one else will hire me. This guy's going to give me $50 a week, and I'm going to write this thing, and it's great. And then of course it's terrible. Just trying to keep it as small as possible. But I think they're right. Yeah. I mean, I think the idea that her drive is I want to be a journalist. That's her drive. And then you get into why does she want to be a journalist? And maybe it's because she wants to be liked, and it's always worked. As you said.
Do you see a kind of structure for the pilot that you could get out of that kind of idea?
Yeah, I think so. She, if she starts the retail job like by the end of Act 1, and then and then meets this mall manager or whoever assigns her to the newsletter, and then I guess I like the idea of her like pouring all this effort and really making this her new project, and then seeing like the final version is like 2 paragraphs cutting out all of the reporting she did with like a big ad for like the phone kiosk store or something.
And then the woman who owns the sweater shop says, "I really liked what you wrote in that thing," and she is floating on air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's the little bit we get to see her actually happy for a minute.
Yeah.
That sort of sad writer thing where someone says something nice about our work and we're like, oh my God, thank you so much.
Yeah, that little crumb will sustain me until the next episode.
Exactly. So I'm sorry for busting you on long answers, but I was just trying to point out, I'm always trying to figure out.
There is a symptom, right? Long answers are a symptom. Of unclear, conceptions.
Right, exactly. And, Jim and I are working on something right now, and we came up with the central idea, the central conflict, which is the feeling of being safe. And we outlined the crap out of this thing. I mean, really, really detailed. We went over and over it. Then we sat down to write. We wrote the first 40 pages, and then Jim called me the next day after we read it, and he said, there's just no drive in the beginning. There's something wrong here. It's structurally, there's all that kind of stuff. And we talked about it, and we figured out an answer, but it all came back to our central question was so simple. It's about somebody who wants to feel safe and can't, right? And the safer she tries to feel, the worse her situation gets. And that's all it is. And anything that deviates from that small central idea screws us. So if I sat there and tried to explain all this stuff to you, you would know that I'm bullshitting. Because I don't have that central simple idea. And it's kind of our North Star in this script. And here we are, professional writers, and we outlined it and everything, and then we forgot it for a little while, or at least we didn't value it the way we needed to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not easy. I don't want to say, oh, once you got that, you're done. But you start getting pulled in other directions, and then if you give in to them too much, you'll find. I think what we repeatedly find is we got to get back to that. What's the central problem? That's it. Last question. Is there any questions else that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to because we were steamrolling you into these long questions thing? Because of our long answers.
I mean, we got to the two areas that I think were really holding me back, which was the, clarifying what this character wants and creating like a clear conflict for the pilot. Yeah, I mean, I think those were my two big questions. I guess I should redo my outline and finish this draft of the pilot first. But I am also kind of like thinking in the back of my head about whether this should be more like serialized or episodic, like if how much I want it to like reset after each episode. And maybe I don't need to like nail that down right now. But that's just kind of something I've been thinking about, like in terms of future seasons, like does she eventually move on to, get back into journalism somehow, or is she, but I want to keep her in the mall. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out like ways to prolong that, her being in this kind of limbo.
Well, I think you answered about 4 different questions there. Or asked 4 different questions. So let me jump in there, and hopefully I picked the right one. But first of all, I just want to say what she will eventually do, I don't care, you don't care, you don't need to know. Okay. Well, when someone pays you to figure it out, you can decide. But what happens at the end of season 2 doesn't matter, right? She's never going to go back to a Gawker kind of thing until the end of the series, or unless you just say, all right, we're taking it out of the mall, we're going to go to the big city now, she's going to do this thing, or whatever. Yeah. Right, but that's not the show, at least not the show that you've been. So I don't freight that. Don't make it so that's another thing you got to think about, right? Okay. And in terms of episodic versus serialized, well, every episode is going to have some sort of contained story, right? Mm-hmm. Even in a serialized thing, it's just the extent of that I think is very fungible, and everybody gets to decide how much. But even when you pick any half-hour kind of thing, there's going to be something the character wants, and by the end of the episode, they're going to get it or not get it. But that's that will lead us to the next one. But it's sort of not contained is the wrong word, but there is an arc that is complete in that episode. Don't you think, Jim? Yeah,
and you can have a little piece of, victory or failure, a satisfactory sense of conclusion for your character, that they have a takeaway that doesn't necessarily solve all their problems and move them down the road very far.
Yeah.
Right.
So I wouldn't, again, don't try to break the whole series. Like, what is it? Just write one good story.
And if you're happy with that pilot script, it's going to tell you things.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of, what you want to figure out, you just need to figure out that story. If you can just figure out one good story, maybe that'll help you nail down what you want the series to be.
You'll get to the end and be like, I want to live in this world all the time with these bunch of characters, and it is Forever 21 forever. Yeah. I never wanted to leave this store and her newsletter.
Because it's terrible for her.
It's terrible, and it's giving you gold.
Yeah, and it's giving you gold. And you don't have a ton of pages to work with, right? I mean, it's a 30-minute thing. How many pages is that? It's just not, for our writers, it feels like, 30 minutes. And, of course, if we had to write, it'd be like, how does anybody write a story with only 30 minutes? But, I mean, it's hard. They're all hard. There's no easy version. Right. But, we all know we have to kill our babies. I think the babies you have to kill is your questions. You have to kill all those extra questions and just say, what's the main question I want to answer?
What's the worst thing that can happen to this character?
Yeah. And how do I make it worse than that? Yeah. And just keep going. All right? And don't clog your mind with all that other stuff yet. Get a draft to that, and then say, "Oh, can I address this kind of theme a little stronger?" And that's what draft 2 is for.
And draft 7 and 8.
Right, and so on.
Claire, it was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for calling in today.
Thank you so much. This is super helpful, and I'm excited to get writing and answer one question.
Good luck, Claire.
Okay, good luck, Claire. Thank you
so much.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
And that's all we've got for you this week. Our producer, J.R. Zamora-Thal, is working the mixing board.
Our logo was designed by Julien Debar-Monclair, and our music was provided by Buddha-Rays out of Austin, Texas.
If you want to get in touch, we are at The Sam and Jim on Instagram and Twitter. And you can find us on Facebook and YouTube as The Writers' Room with Sam and Jim.
And if you like hanging out in the room with us, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And tell a friend, would you, so we can get JR paid. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.